Hello and welcome. This is the US Election Watch. I'm Osama Shab from the latest on Hurricane Milton to bringing you the latest on why the Democrats as well as the Republicans are up in arms to abolish the Electoral College system. To Kamala Harris's campaign office being shot at for the third time this month. There's a lot lined up for you, but first, let's take a look at the headlines. Kamala Harris's running mate Tim Walz says Electoral College system needs to go, adding that US needs a national popular vote. Inflation in the United States reaches its lowest point since February of 2021. The consumer price index increased by 0.2% in September. Donald Trump slams CBS for editing a 60-minute chat with Kamala Harris. Trump accuses CBS, saying that illegal changes were made to make Harris look better. Harris's Arizona campaign office shot at for the third time in just a month. The shooting comes as Harris and Walz head to Arizona. And Kamala Harris raises $1 billion since launching her presidential campaign. Harris has raised $147 million more than what Trump has raised so far this year. Only 25 days to go till the US chooses its 47th president. And both the candidates, they are busy campaigning as they scramble to make their final voter pitches. Here's what on their schedule today. Vice President Kamala Harris is set to participate at a Univision Town Hall, Nevada's Las Vegas. Harris will then head to Arizona's Phoenix to deliver remarks at a campaign event in Chandler. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump, he is gearing up to deliver an address to the Detroit Economic Club in Michigan. As the race to the White House enters its penultimate stage, the latest Reuters and Ipsos polling reveals that Harris is leading Trump among suburban voters by 47% to 41%. Meanwhile, the latest updates about Hurricane Milton. Milton made landfall as a Category 3 storm around 8:30 p.m. local time in Florida's Siesta Key Wednesday evening, bringing with it mammoth 28-feet waves, strong winds, heavy rainfall, and a devastating storm surge. This morning, the monster storm made its way towards the Atlantic, sustaining maximum wind speeds of up to 140 kilometers per hour, meaning it's a Category 1 hurricane. At least 4 deaths have been confirmed in St. Lucie County on Florida's Atlantic coast, where officials said that tornadoes touched down ahead of the hurricane. Anticipating further flooding, Governor Ron DeSantis, he has underlined that more than 80,000 people are taking refuge in overnight shelters. Florida's police chief, he has warned that we'll be finding bodies. Moreover, around 11 million Americans, they are still at risk of flash and river flooding. Not only this, according to poweroutage.us, more than 3.3 million households have been left without electricity in Florida. Stepping up relief efforts, the Biden administration has deployed thousands of federal personnel to affected areas. They include more than 1,000 Coast Guard members. In fact, we have with us Fatu Kamara, senior journalist. All right, we'll try and get the latest from there and try to get you the latest on the Hurricane Milton's trajectory after the landfall as well. Meanwhile, moving on to the Electoral College debate that has stirred up, the Democratic vice presidential candidate Tim Walz, he has called for abolishing the Electoral College as a means of electing American presidents. During a Tuesday meeting with donors, Walz said, and I quote, "I think all of us know the Electoral College needs to go. We need a national popular vote." But why is Walz sniping at the Electoral College? You see, the US presidential elections, they aren't as simple as they might initially appear. When Americans, they cast their votes for president, they're not voting directly for a candidate. Instead, they're choosing electors in a system known as the Electoral College. Our next report underlines all you need to know. Take a look.
I'm back again, and the reason is because I know so many...
All right, we'll try and get you that report in just a short while from now. But joining us to discuss on this matter a little further, I'm currently joined by Robert Shapiro, political analyst, professor of political science in the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. I'm also joined by Spencer Crickley, Democrat communications strategist. Also have with us Adele Malka-Nazarian, American media personality and a political analyst. Welcome to this discussion. But before we talk about this, let's take a look at that report.
Established in 1787, the Founding Fathers created the Electoral College as a compromise between electing the president by a vote in Congress and by popular vote. In the college, each state has a set number of electors based on its congressional representation, senators, and House members. There are 538 electors total. Most states allocate all their electoral votes to the candidate who wins the majority of the popular vote in that state. Maine and Nebraska are the only exceptions with their proportional allocation. A candidate needs a majority of at least 270 electoral votes to claim the presidency. It is important to note that the college is not free of controversies. Candidates can win the presidency without winning the popular vote. We have seen this in the elections of 1824, 1876, 1888, 2000, and as recent as 2016 when Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton despite securing less votes. This sparks debates about fairness and representation. Campaigns focus intensely on a handful of swing states where the outcome is uncertain, often leaving out voters in states deemed safe for one party. While some advocate for abolishing the Electoral College in favor of a direct popular vote, arguing it would enhance democratic legitimacy, supporters claim it protects smaller states' interests and ensures a broader national campaign. So, what's the bottom line? The Electoral College is a fascinating blend of historical compromise and modern contention. As elections loom, the debate rages on. Is it a cornerstone of democracy or an outdated relic? Buckle up, the story is far from over. Bureau Report for NDTV World.
Well, the story is far from over, and to talk about that story, let me first go across to Spencer Crickley. Spencer, as candidates, they're jolting to make their final pitches. Is there a growing difference of opinion within the Democratic camp? And of course, we are talking about Harris and Walz here.
I think that most Democrats favor the abolition of the Electoral College. Whether that's realistic in any time soon, I think, is a whole other question. But there is a widespread feeling that our electoral system not only has distortions in its representation, as were described in your report just now, but also is just so complicated that it encourages gamesmanship, for example, of the sort where campaigns tend to focus all of their attention on usually between 6 and 8 battleground states every election. So as I say, I think there's widespread feeling among Democrats and also among many Republicans and independents that it should be abolished. I just don't think that it's realistic anytime soon because it would require amending the Constitution.
Absolutely. And Adele, I want to understand from you, as a political analyst yourself, I just want to try and understand the Republican side of the story. In 2016, Trump, he won because of the Electoral College system, given he lost the popular vote. Where do the Republicans then should stand on this particular issue, according to you?
Thank you so much. Look, in my experience, I've seen that Republicans have been staunchly supportive of the Constitution. And I have to say that the Electoral College is enshrined in the Constitution, and it has been a cornerstone of American democracy for over 200 years. The founding fathers created the Electoral College to protect against the tyranny of the majority. And I have to say this, Tim Walz and Democrats pushing to abolish the Electoral College, it's nothing more than a blatant power grab. It's honestly designed to rig future elections in their favor and silence millions of Americans. As our colleague on the panel said, they know they can't, well, he didn't say this, but basically what they do is by eliminating the Electoral College, they're trying to concentrate the power into a handful of liberal, densely populated cities like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, where their base lies. And what they do is they know very well they can't win on fair terms. So their goal is to erase the voices of smaller states and rural communities, those who don't fall in line with the radical coastline agenda, basically. And this honestly isn't about, expanding democracy. What's going on is that it's an attempt to honestly undermine democracy. And I gotta say, abolishing the Electoral College would hand over the presidency to the whims of urban elites and undermine the very foundation of federalism that protects the balance of power between the states. And it's a very, very dangerous agenda that the Democrats are pushing along with Tim Walz, because they're terrified of losing the elections fair and square. And honestly, the little people in the middle are the ones that will be voiceless if that is the case. So I think the Republican, perspective is that the Electoral College absolutely is an important, critical, actually, check to have. And I have to say, there's no country on earth that I'm aware of that doesn't have some kind of checks or balances enshrined in their governing doctrine, their constitution, however they may call it. And frankly, I have to say, you'd have a situation basically where if you don't have the Electoral College, it's democracy without checks and balances. It's mob rule. And history has shown us, frankly, that this leads to chaos, instability, and even tyranny. I have to say, it would allow for America, unfortunately, to go down a dangerous path that could result in, extremist groups taking over under the guise of democracy.
Adele, you talk about the checks and balances. There is also a question of representation and fairness now. Now, how would you address the concerns about unequal representation in that particular case and the fairness in the current system then?
Absolutely. I think there is, if you look at the population density, of course, California has look, if you take California's economy, it could stand alone as its own country, basically. And it could very well, according to the GDP that it brings in, be able to break away from California, from the rest of the US. I don't think that's going to happen. There were attempts for, breaking up the state. But I think when it comes to representation, California, New York, Chicago, again, liberal enclaves. And if we're going to talk about the sheer numbers of people that come out and vote, and if we're going to take and juxtapose it against the rest of the population, of course, you take those different states and the cities specifically, and those numbers of the population based on sheer density and the population would outnumber the rest of the state. So I think that's the rest of the country, sorry. And I think that's where it comes into play, why the Electoral College is so important. It designates a number of electorates based on the population comparatively.
All right, we'll try and get a reaction from Mr. Quickly, but before that, Robert Shapiro, you have been listening very patiently. I just want to understand from you the biggest criticism for Electoral College system. It is, is undermining the popular vote. What, according to you, are some of the disadvantages or the dangers of the Electoral College to the United States democracy, as both the Republicans and Democrats are putting it?
Well, the danger of one is simply the principle of one person, one vote. And it clearly was not the intention of the founders for the system to be set up in that fair way. They didn't care. They did not care about fairness. They cared about putting together a plan for electing the president that they could get broad support for in the Constitution. And I think both speakers have really laid out the differences. For the change to occur, watch what would happen if the Republicans lost the presidential election because they lost the electoral vote but won the popular vote. That would change. That would change the tune of Republicans. I think what we've heard really fairly represents the nature of the debate. One other characteristic of the electoral college is there's no constitutional right to vote for the electors. Okay, this has only come about through history and the states adopting that. There is no constitutional right for the voters. It's the state legislatures who determine how the electors are selected, and they've just determined that they be selected through winner-take-all elections by the popular vote. The constitutional amendment this is almost a ridiculous discussion, because getting a constitutional amendment is close to impossible. The only chance for the system to change, there's currently legislation going around in all the states in which the state legislatures would pass a law that says they will assign their electors for their state to the winner of the popular vote, meaning that if a state voted for one candidate but another candidate got the popular vote, that state would give its electoral votes to the winning candidate of the popular vote. And that in the law, it would only take effect when enough states have passed it that would enable the winner to get 270 votes. That would be contested in the courts for a variety of reasons that are too complicated here. But I think the other two speakers have laid out the issues very well.
All right, Mr. Crickley, firstly, react to what Mr. Shapiro has to say. Also, I want to understand the motivations behind these reforms. What motivates the Democrats, especially because after what Mr. Walz has said, what exactly motivates the Democrats to reform or abolish this existing system at the moment? I basically want to understand that. And how do you think it will improve the democratic process?
Sure. In terms of what motivates the Democrats, I would ask that we set aside dark conspiracy theories on the part of the Democrats to end democracy somehow. There are legitimate debates to be had that have been going on now for 2.5 centuries, roughly, about just how to balance direct democracy versus representative democracy, and the Electoral College is one of the institutions at the center of that debate. It's especially rich hearing accusations like this against the Democratic Party from the Republican Party, which is led by a man who literally tried to overthrow the last election and is in favor of terminating the Constitution at will, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I know we don't need to get into that debate now. I think that the concern among many Democrats, and as I say, among some Republicans and independents as well, is this issue of the one man, one vote, or one person, one vote principle that is fundamental to American democracy. But as the founders recognize, it's very difficult to balance that kind of pure direct democracy against representative democracy in a system that's going to be impervious to the risk of mob rule, which is a very real risk. If you have a charismatic demagogue, for example, like Donald Trump, he can become very destructive while at the same time very popular. And the founders were very concerned about that. They warned explicitly about people who have the power of popular persuasion, but a total absence of character. So it is a complicated issue. On the one hand, you can say, how is it fair that Hillary Clinton, for example, beat Donald Trump by 3 million votes and yet lost the election? And how Republicans have, I believe, lost the popular vote in, if I'm remembering right, 8 out of 10 of the most recent presidential elections. And with the effects of gerrymandering, which is the deliberate design of congressional districts to produce the results you want instead of fair representation, many people would argue the Republican Party is trying to work out a system in which they can win even though they lose the popular vote again and again and again. However, there is a legitimate concern about the representation of the less populous states. It is true that states like California and New York, which have enormous populations and which vote overwhelmingly Democratic, would probably get to elect the president in election after election for many years to come, and that's a legitimate concern. So this is a genuinely complicated issue. As Mr. Shapiro just pointed out, I think it's very unlikely that there's going to be a constitutional amendment of any kind in the near future, let alone one that abolishes the Electoral College. But I think this issue will keep coming up. My advice to Democrats, though, would be to, it's an interesting discussion to have, and it's an important one, but I think it's far more important to focus on winning enough votes that it's not an issue.
This is one discussion that is going to go on for some time. Unfortunately, we're running short of time at the moment. Adel Malka-Nazarian, Robert Shapiro, and Spencer Crickley, thank you very much for joining us on NDTV and having this fascinating discussion. Moving on, after civil rights groups sued Georgia in an effort to extend the state's voter registration deadline by a week to account for residents who may not have been able to register in the wake of Hurricane Helene. Similar groups have now sued Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Secretary of State Corbett, asking them to reopen voter registration amid Hurricanes Helene and Milton. The League of Women Voters of Florida and other such groups as well. Meanwhile, the authorities say that the Harris campaign office in Arizona, it has been shot at for the third time in less than a month. The shooting occurred between midnight to 1 a.m. Around the same time, the last two incidents occurred. No one was injured in any of the three shootings. The incident came just as Harris and her running mate Tim Walz prepared to head to Arizona for a rally. And we have with us Glenn Carothers, former Deputy National Intelligence Officer and career CIA officer. Welcome to NDTV, Carl. My first and the most obvious question to you is, what security measures should be taken to protect Vice President Harris, along with her campaign staff, and also Donald Trump, who has also had 2 assassination attempts? Are there any concerns about the effectiveness of the current security protocols?
Well, in the wake of the second attempt to shoot or kill President Trump, the Congress passed an order that the Secret Service provide the same level of protection for candidates for the office of president as the president, him or herself, receives. So the number of Secret Service officers and the layers of protection for the 4 principal candidates have been enhanced from that date forward. Is that adequate? I've said many times, and I'm hardly unusual in this, that to quote President Kennedy, I think the day literally that he was assassinated, he said, if someone wishes to kill me, it will be possible to do. And there's no perfect layers of protection. Now, to the broader issue of why this kind of danger exists, or rather why there are increased acts of violence against political candidates' offices and so on, people shape their behavior based on the general environment. When I was a child, and this will sound silly, but it's a profoundly disturbing reality. When I was a child, there was a television program, Superman, and Superman, of course, can leap from tall buildings and fly. And a normal adult realizes that is fantasy. But in fact, numbers of people, and in particular children, because it was a children's show more than anything, were literally jumping out of windows. People do whatever the environment seems to say is normal or acceptable. In America, you have tremendous gun culture, and you have the demonization of political opponents, in particular by the Republican candidate. And therefore, numbers of people at the margins will increasingly engage in acts of violence. That's what's happening.
Absolutely. Mr. Carothers, having said that, I want to understand the impact on the campaign, and what possible impact could these incidents have on Vice President Harris's campaign, and how might they also affect public perception of her candidacy?
Well, her campaign, we know that Donald Trump, after the assassination attempt, has been, I guess, obliged to speak behind bulletproof glass. And I think the president has been doing that, whatever president has been doing that for years. I suspect that either has already been the case or will be the case for the Democratic candidates, Harris and Walz. Beyond that, you have substantial Secret Service details protecting 24 hours a day the candidates. The perceptions, this just plays into the already polarized nature of this campaign in particular. And I don't see that changing, especially Harris's position or the public's view of her.
All right, Mr. Glenn Carothers, thank you very much for getting us your views on this particular topic. We are running short of time. We'll slip into a very short break now. More news and updates continue on NDTV World.